Hi, 5th and 6th graders. We're going to start a new novel study together. The title of the book is called The Landry News by Andrew Clements. New Kid Gets Old Teacher, Chapter 1. Kara Lewis, I am talking to you. Kara Landry doesn't answer her mom. She was busy. She sat in a gray folding table at a kitchenette, a heap of torn scraps of paper in front of her. A roll of clear tape. Kara was putting the pieces back together. Little by little, they fell into place on a fresh sheet of paper, about 18 inches wide. The top part was already taking shape, a row of neat block letters carefully drawn to look like a newspaper. Kara, honey, you promised you wouldn't start that again. Didn't you learn anything from the last time? Kara's mom was talking about what happened at school when Kara attended with 4th graders just after her dad left. There had been some problems. Don't worry, Mom. Kara Landry had only lived in Carlton for 6 months. From the day she moved to town during April of 4th grade, everyone had ignored her. She had been easy for the other kids to ignore, just a brainy, quiet girl. The kind of girl who always turns in her assignments, who always aces her test. She wore a plain brown plaid dress and a clean white blouse, dependable as the tile patterns on the floor. Average height, skinny arms and legs, white socks, black shoes. Her light brown hair was always pulled into a thin ponytail, and her pale blue eyes hardly ever connected with anyone else. As far as the other kids were concerned, Kara was there, but just barely. All that changed one afternoon when 5th grade started. It was like any other Friday for Kara at Denton Elementary School. Math first in the morning, then science and gym, lunch and health, and finally reading, language arts, and social studies in Mr. Larson's room. Mr. Larson was the kind of teacher that parents wrote negative letters about. Like, Dear Mr. Barnes, we know our child is only in 2nd grade, but please make sure she's not in Mr. Larson's class in 5th grade. Our lawyer tells us we have the right to make these changes. So in closing, we urge you not to put our child in Mr. Larson's class. Still, somebody had to be in Mr. Larson's class. And if your mom was always too tired to join PTA or volunteer groups, or if you mostly hung out in the library by yourself, you didn't know that Mr. Larson was a lousy teacher. And if your mom didn't know enough to write a letter to the principal, you were pretty much guaranteed to get into Mr. Larson's class. Mr. Larson said he believed in an open classroom. At Parents' Night every September, Mr. Larson explained that children learn best when they learn things on their own. This was not a new idea. This idea was used by practically every teacher in America. But Mr. Larson used his own special way. Almost every day, he would get the class started and then pour some coffee in a big red thermos and open up his newspaper and sit. Over the years, Mr. Larson had taught himself how to ignore the chaos erupting in his classroom. Unless there was a sound of breaking glass, screams, or splintering furniture, Mr. Larson didn't even look up. Imagine that. Mrs. Fontel doesn't even like a pencil tapping. If other teachers or principals complained about the noise, he would ask the student to shut the door and go back to reading his newspaper. Even though Mr. Larson had not done much of day-to-day teaching, he had quite a bit of learning that happened in room 145 anyway. The room itself had a lot to do with the fact that room 145 was like a giant glacier, layered and layered full of papers and magazines and things that were purchased over the last 20 years. Time Magazine, Good Housekeeping, U.S. News and World Report, Smithsonian, Cricket, Rolling Stone, National Geographic, Boy's Life, Organic Gardening, The New Yorker, Life, Highlights, Fine Woodworking, Reader's Digest, Popular Mechanics, and dozens of others. Heaps of them filled the shelves and cluttered the corners. Newspapers, too, were stacked in front of the windows, recently piled on Mr. Larson's actual chair. The stack fell over on his desktop, and it made quite a convenient place to rest his coffee cup. Each square of the small space and a good portion of the ceilings were covered with maps, old reports, newspaper clippings, diagrams, sentences, cartoons, decorating, cursive writing chart, quotations, and the Declaration of Independence, and a complete Bill of Rights, a dizzying assortment of grammatical and literary information. The bulletin boards were huge pieces of paper with shaggy, colorful collages. Whenever Mr. Larson's found an article he likes, he'd staple it up there. For the past 8 or 10 years, Mr. Larson had not bothered to take down the old ones. He just wallpapered over them. Every few months, with the humidity, a big buildup would happen, and all the staples would come undone, and the things would fall to the ground. Freestanding racks of books were scattered all over room 145. There were racks of loaded mystery materials, Newbery winners, historical fiction, racks of almanacs, well-worn pictures that fifth graders had drawn. My goodness, it would be so messy, I couldn't stand it. The reading corner was jammed with pillows and was sheltered by old cardboard boxes. The dome had won first prize 15 years ago, and each triangle of the dome had been designed with blue or green or yellow paint, like flags of nations or presidents of the United States or the last Indianapolis 500 winners. Dozens and dozens of different mini lessons. The dome was missing half its top. It looked more like an igloo in warm weather. Still, every class period, there would be a scramble to see who would go hide in that certain section. Principal didn't approve of Mr. Larson's room one bit. It gave him the creeps. Dr. Barnes liked things to be spotless and orderly like his own office. A place for everything and everything in its place. Occasionally threatened to make Mr. Larson change rooms, but there was never a room for him to move to. It was the room farthest from the office, so Dr. Barnes didn't have to look. Even though it was chaotic and cluttered, Mr. Larson's class suited Kara Landry just fine. She was able to tune out the noise and the other kids. She would get to class early, pull a desk in the corner in some bookshelves. Then she would get a large map of a tripod and hide behind that. She would spread out her books and papers on the bookshelf. To her right, she would set up her plastic pencil case. On the bulletin board to the left was a small private space. It was like she had her own office. Then, on Friday afternoon in October, Kara took what she had been working, and without saying a word, she put up 4 thumbtacks and stuck it to the overloaded bulletin board in Mr. Larson's room. It was Denton Elementary School's first edition of the Landry News. Okay, that's chapter 1 of our first book, The Landry News. What I would like you to do today is, who are the characters and what is the setting? So who are the people in the story and where are we in the story? Also, what was Kara doing at her kitchen table and what is she setting up in Mr. Landry's classroom? And one last question, I apologize, if you could describe for me what Mr. Larson's classroom looks like to you. So you could draw me a picture. You could call me and tell me. You can type it or write it down. Okay, so let's go over the questions that we're going to go over, or the things that we want to know from this first chapter. Okay, who are the characters? So who are the people in the story that we've met so far? I would say there are 4 characters, but we really only know about 3 of them. There was one person that was mentioned very briefly. I wouldn't worry about that person. I would worry about the 3 characters so far that we've met. Where is this taking place? Is it in a school? Is it in an elementary school? Where is it taking place? Okay. What do you think Kara was doing in her kitchen at the dinette? That's like a dining room table or a kitchen table if you don't have both. And lastly, describe to me what the classroom looks like that she went into. And I think I already gave you his name and I shouldn't have, but what does that man's classroom look like? What would you picture it to look like? Thank you so much for participating and listening to the first part of the Landry News. I will send you a typed questions, or you can call me with it, or you can rewatch this last part, whatever works best for you. See you soon.